Computer applications may fall into two broad categories. One would be considered something like a batch application, where we run the application on some regular basis, daily, weekly, monthly, and there's no human interaction. The idea is the program begins and maybe it reads data from a file or a database, processes that data in some way, and when all of the data has been processed, then the program simply terminates. But there's no prompting the user for any kind of values, asking the user for any input. On the other hand, another type of application that we might write would be something called an interactive application. And this is going to involve sending information to the user by displaying it at the screen or the terminal or the console, and also requesting values or input from the user. So let's take a look at how we would proceed in developing such applications. First, let's consider the output side. When someone is learning Java, or probably any programming language, the classic program that they're introduced to is something called the good old Hello World program. In the case of Java, what we're doing is sending the message Hello World to the console or the terminal, displaying it for the user to read or to see. This is accomplished through the use of various print methods. We might use the print method, the print line, or the printf, depending upon how we wanted to render the data. But the point is, these methods, when invoked, will send their argument or their parameter to the screen or the console for display. So we should already be comfortable with that, having seen something like a Hello World program. Now let's mention here that system out is an object. This is the object that's associated with the screen or the console. The reason I bring this to your attention is system out is the name of the object, print line, printf would be the name of the method. And the syntax that we use here to invoke the method is to refer to the name of the object with a variable that identifies the object, in this case system out. Then we put a dot and we follow that with the name of the method that we wish to call or to invoke. Now let's look at the interactive side, getting some input from the user, not just sending something to the user, but having the user provide values which will affect the execution of the program. So how does a user typically communicate such information or data to a computer program? Well, probably through the keyboard. Now the keyboard is associated with another type of object called system in, which makes sense. System out, we're sending stuff out of the computer for the user to see. System in, somehow we're getting something into the computer application for the program to work with, to manipulate in some way. There's a special class that's available to us in Java called scanner. And scanner is such that will instantiate an object, create what's called a scanner object, and associate it with system in, that is, associated with the keyboard. Now, in order to use scanner, we have to let the Java system know that we're going to be using this particular class. So we use something called an import statement. And with the import statement, we say import java.util.scanner. Java.util is actually a package. It's kind of like a library that contains many different classes. And we're simply informing the Java system, the Java runtime environment, that we're going to be using one of the classes found in this library or in this package, something called scanner. And as we said, we're going to create an object of type scanner and associate it with system in or the keyboard. So again, Java util is simply a package and contains many different classes. So as you learn more about Java, you might import other things from Java util. But scanner is what we're focusing our attention on right now, being able to get input from the user. Now, in order to create an object from any class, we're going to invoke a constructor, which is a special kind of a function associated with the class. Now, the name of the constructor, the name of this special function, is actually the same as the name of the class. So what we see is we tell the system that we're creating this thing called keyboard. That's our variable, and it's of type scanner. So that's declaring a variable that will effectively be, for our purposes, the scanner object. Technically, it's pointing to or making a reference to the scanner object somewhere in memory. So keyboard in this case would be called a reference variable. We'll talk more about that later. But over on the other side of the assignment operator, where we see the equal, we then see new scanner. What is this? Scanner is the name of the constructor, same name as the class. And we're passing into this constructor an argument or parameter called system_in, the name of the object that is effectively associated with the keyboard. And new says, make one of these new scanner objects and use system_in as the thing that we're going to be working with, that we're associating the object with. So hence, when we refer to keyboard later on, our variable, we're actually referring to system_in, which is known to the Java runtime environment as the actual keyboard. So we tend to use this name keyboard very often as the name of the variable. Doesn't have to be keyboard, could be anything. In other applications, we might choose to use simply the word in, I-N, which says that we're getting something into the computer. But keyboard conveys a little bit more meaningful information to someone reading the code. Now, classes have methods associated with them. We've seen with system_out that we could invoke print, printline, printf. These are all methods that are associated with that kind of an object. In this case, for a scanner object, there are several methods that can be used to read input from our input source. In this case, it'll be from the keyboard or system_in. These methods are specialized for reading a particular data type. So we'll take a closer look at these and give you a better feel for how to use these methods. Now, the methods are said to send messages to the object. That's a little bit more formal or precise description of how methods work with objects in an object-oriented programming language. So here are some of the scanner object methods. We've got something called nextInt. What we do is we use that reference variable for the object we created, which we're thinking of as keyboard. We use the dot, and then we use nextInt. And we're invoking the nextInt method for this keyboard object. What this is going to do is read from the stream of characters that the user has typed in through the keyboard, and it's going to read an integer and assign it to a variable called hours, which must be declared as int. We'll walk through some actual code from a program. That's where I got this assignment statement. Next double will read a double. Remember, a double is a number that may have a decimal or fractional component. For example, 5.5 is a double, whereas 5 is simply an integer. So depending upon the type of data that we are getting from the user through this input stream, we're going to use an appropriate method to take that data and make it into the appropriate data type internally within the computer, or say within our Java application. So hence pay rate would be defined as a double. Next line actually reads the entire stream of characters that the user entered. And here, this is actually reading a string of characters, hence name would be a string object. Okay, here's the complete Java program. This program is called payroll.java. And you can see right at the beginning, we're importing the Java util scanner class, or we should say we're importing the scanner class from the Java util package. So we're basically telling the system that we're going to be using this class. This is where you can find it in the Java util package. We do that up front as one of the very first statements. Then we define our class. This is actually an application called payroll. So we're going to have a main method. Then we have some variables we're working with. And remember, we had referred to hours in our sample assignment statement. Hours is an int. Pay rate was also referred to, and that's a double. So we create our scanner object. Then what we do is put out a message to the user. This is referred to as a prompt, letting the user know that the program is going to sit there and wait until they enter a value and subsequently hit the enter key to send that stream of characters into the program. What happens is we then invoke from keyboard, our scanner object, the next line method, and read the entire stream of characters and place it into something called name, which up here was defined as a string object. Then further down, we put out another prompt that say, how many hours did you work? So now we're looking for an integer. And we invoke keyboard.nextInt, hit enter, receive the value, and assign it to hours, which again was declared previously as an int variable. And finally, we read keyboard.nextDouble, where we had asked the user for their hourly pay rate, which is going to be, say, some number of dollars and cents. So there's going to be a decimal point, a double value, and we assign that to pay rate, which once again was the double variable we declared up here. Additionally, in the program, we work with these values and print out some output. Let me go ahead and compile this and run it. And as we run it, what we'll do is we'll see how these prompts come out and we see how we interact with it. So the first prompt that comes out is, what is your name? And recall that that's asking for a character string. So we'll type in something that has a whole bunch of characters in it. We'll say John Smith Jr. And that whole stream of characters is going to be read through the call to next line, which is right here. And it will be assigned to the variable called name, which is a string object. So when we hit enter, that assignment has occurred. Then, how many hours did you work? Now we're looking to get an integer value and assign it to the integer variable. So let's suppose we put in a 40-hour week. We hit enter, the value is sent in, and it is assigned to the hours variable. Then the question comes up is, what is your hourly rate? So we scroll down a little bit, and that's where this line is being executed, reading a double. So let's suppose that we're making $20.50 per hour. We hit enter, and now the program reads that, assigns it to pay rate, which is a double, does the arithmetic here to compute the final value, and what is happening is it printing out hello plus whatever is in the name variable, which is this whole value of John Smith, comma, Jr. Your gross pay is, and then it's got the result of the computation, and we see that down here. Now that's the very basic idea of how the scanner object comes into play and can be associated with the keyboard, allowing us to read data entered by the user at the keyboard. So we've looked at the next int, the next double, and the next line methods to kind of give you a taste of how we can get input from the user. Remember, each one of these is reading data of a particular type entered by the user at the keyboard. When the user hits enter, the value is sent into the system, and then the next method, next int, next line, next double, extracts that value may do some manipulation to convert the data, and then assigns it to the appropriate variable. Now, for purposes of getting started with basic interactive programs of input and output, this should get you going. But keep in mind that there's a little bit more to this. So there are some subtle points about processing stream input. The details of how the values are actually read and stored will be discussed later, but at this point we've got enough to get us going to make an interactive program, not simply sending things to the screen, but also getting values back from the user. So for now, for purposes of playing with and using nextInt, we'll simply assume that the user is going to be entering integers as we've requested, and not worry about any of these subtleties. Later on, we will examine these. But that's enough to get you going and write some basic interactive applications.